Welcome back to the Seeds of Revolution. This was the inaugural year of Camas's new community microgrant program. The Camas Collective decided to reinvest proceeds from the bookshop back into the community by awarding grants to collectives and community groups which don't have access to regular grant funding, but which do amazing work in fields such as food security, tenants' rights, ecological action, radical media, and Indigenous sovereignty. Today's episode is an interview with one of our microgrant recipients, the Humans of Fairy Creek. A group of volunteer community theater artists and musicians, who are also activists and anarchists, they have been involved in the movement known as the Fairy Creek Blockade. Most of the collective are in their 20s, queer, neurodivergent, and living with financial and housing instability. Humans of Fairy Creek believe that the mostly young people who experienced violence from the Canadian justice system, while taking a principled and non-violent stand for old-growth forests and Indigenous sovereignty, deserve to have their stories told. They link these stories to the escalating global ecocide and genocidal atrocities of imperialist and corporate interests, and have made an intention to do their work in a culture of care. With that, we are proud to stand in solidarity with our friends, the Humans of Fairy Creek. We are talking to three amazing activists about the Humans of Fairy Creek. I'm here with Q and Karina and Tasha, and they have a show which debuted last year at the Victoria Fringe Fest, and they are doing a sequel which is going to be at the Vancouver Fringe Fest about Fairy Creek and about the politics surrounding their involvement in old-growth logging protests. So first off, Q and Karina and Tasha, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. If you could just start by telling us a little bit about, for those of us who don't remember or maybe weren't around, what were the Fairy Creek protests, what were they about, and how were you involved in them?
So to me, the Fairy Creek blockade, as it came to be known, was about people realizing that the very, very, very last old growth in British Columbia was being cut down for profit in a place particularly special because it's one of the, is it the last intact watershed?
It's the southernmost intact old growth watershed on Vancouver Island.
Very, very special place. And for me, what drew me into working on, I guess I don't think of it as a protest so much. I mean, yes, I guess it was, but I think of it as people who just were showing up for their futures, for Indigenous sovereignty, for just like oxygen. So protest is a word that I find a little bit triggering, I guess, even though I guess in English that's what we use. So I was not up at Fairy Creek very much, although I did spend some time up there, but I started by myself doing a vigil at the legislature, and then it just ended up being this weekly rally where sometimes like 100 people would show up. So, and I did a lot of other actions during that, especially that summer.
I was back and forth. So my involvement with the Fairy Creek Blockade was that I was back and forth between my place in Victoria and so-called Victoria and there at Fairy Creek at headquarters for about 6 months. So I would spend like a couple weeks at a time out at the blockade or a weekend or whatever I could do. I would go out there and be out there and playing music for all the people out there. I was playing my fiddle and I was singing songs and yeah, that was kind of my main involvement was through music.
Yeah, so I mean a little bit more background, like the Fairy Creek Blockade is part of many decades of like forest defense and land defense in so-called British Columbia and on so-called Vancouver Island, like most notably following up like Clayoquot Summer and the War of the Woods being like the latest forest defense initiative. It was I think in a lot of ways a lot different than previous old growth logging protests, in that like how it ended up being structured was very, very decentralized, spread across many different locations. There was Eden Camp, there was HQ, there was Waterfall, there was Sasquatch at one point. And so there were all these different like fronts, basically. There was 2000 Road, where folks were working to disrupt or stop active logging or road building. That started in August 2020 with the first block up at Ridge Camp, and continued through the like fall winter of 2021, up until folks were actually like in active cut blocks, like blowing whistles to try to get loggers to not cut down the trees, because obviously you're not allowed to cut down trees when there's people in your cut block. As for myself, I started going up in the beginning of May 2021. Basically, like the moment I graduated university and finished up classes, I went up there. I'd been like watching and keeping track since the previous summer. It was an area I feel connected to, because I was like kind of familiar from like hiking and stuff, and just knowing that it was like a really ecologically special place, and also on unceded Pacheedaht territory. So I was at HQ, and then later in the summer was bouncing around between different camps, hiking up to Ridge Camp, hiking down to Waterfall, getting arrested at Waterfall, and then doing a little bit of stuff kind of at roadside back in the fall when after HQ got raided.
Karina, you said that the Fairy Creek blockade was different from previous blockades and that it was more decentralized. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, as you know, Camas is an anarchist space. Were previous efforts to protect old growth forest, was the opposition or were the protesters organized more hierarchically? Was it more by interest groups? Talk a little bit more, if you would, about that decentralized difference with Fairy Creek.
Yeah, I would say that like the decentralization mainly stemmed from literally like spatial facts. Like thinking back about previous like logging protests in BC, like going back to Sulphur Pass in the 80s, like that was, from what I understand, like centralized at like one location. Thinking about like I guess like War in the Woods and Clackwat Summer had like a couple of different sites, but like those were the sites where like huge masses of people would gather, and there would be these like mass arrests and they would all get carried off. Like Fairy Creek was a ever shifting constellation of like different camps, and like front lines were created and destroyed over a matter of days, and all these different sites, like through TFL 46, which was the land base, quote unquote, owned by Teal Jones, where they were doing their logging. So like there was an HQ headquarters at Fairy Creek where there was sort of there was a some level of like organization in terms of like the social media was controlled by a certain group of folks, and so that kind of helped to organize in terms of like encouraging people to come first to HQ, and then they would get sent out on like missions to various camps depending on where people were needed. But then like once you got to those actual camps, like it was totally like autonomously run, like depending on literally just who was there. Like it ended up being a lot of the time that just the folks that were there for the longest amount of time would kind of ended up like taking on these leadership roles, just because like they know what's up, they know where the supplies are, like they know just like the rhythms of that camp. And so although you had this like kind of central, and there's been lots of like critical feedback on like this kind of central like hierarchical body that did like a lot of the social media work at Fairy Creek, like the actual operations of like the various front lines were very much like I wouldn't say they were non-hierarchical, because I think that hierarchy did happen, and we did bring it with us, all coming in with our own like ingrained colonial mindsets and so on. But like there was a lot of opportunity for the flourishing of non-hierarchical and decentralized like ways of organizing, and it was like constantly in flux and changing depending on where and when you were.
For those of us who weren't on the island or don't remember, how did the blockade end?
Before I add to that, before I say something about that, I just want to add to what Karina was saying, which is that, if I remember correctly, you guys could check me if I'm wrong, but in our play last year, we talked about how the different fronts were spread over about 80 kilometers of land, and probably up to 8,000 people came through. So very, very, lots going on, not able to track it all that kind of stuff. But yeah, do you want to talk about the violence of the end?
Yeah. You asked how it ended. It ended violently with RCMP assaults and arrests and
Death.
Yeah, death.
Yeah. Also, at the same time that the RCMP was raiding HQ, there was a huge rally here in Victoria on the legislature lawn. And I just want people to understand that there were like on the Robert Bateman building and at the top of the legislature, there were snipers.
And Q, when you say death, people killed by RCMP?
There was, yes, there was medication taken from one land defender. An Indigenous land defender had their medication taken from them, and then later died as a result.
There was also a land defender who had their phone smashed by RCMP, which later resulted in their death when they were unable to reach out support for drug use. In addition, an elderly man disappeared on the trail to Ridge Camp, and like RCMP basically were like actively not allowing like our community to like search for him, and did not really mount an adequate search effort of their own. And so his body has still not been recovered. So there was 3 people at least whose deaths were directly in relation with the Fairy Creek blockade.
What has happened to the old growth forests that you were trying to protect since then?
So partly as a result of the efforts of all of the land defenders at Fairy Creek, there was a deferral put in place for further road building and logging in large portions of the Fairy Creek watershed. However, several areas that were actively being defended during the course of the blockade, including the cut blocks around Heli Camp, were logged that fall. That's when I was talking about folks like hiding in the cut blocks, trying to prevent the trees from coming down. And also cut blocks along 2000 Road were cut earlier in the spring. There were also camps in the early days set up back in Camas. Those were logged early on, like pretty much immediately after they were raided and taken down by RCMP. And then, of course, there continues to be like ongoing, like, the scale and rate of like old growth logging in British Columbia like hasn't stopped or even really slowed since then. There's been active logging recently in Bugaboo, in Looper Creek, in the Nitnat. Yeah, it's still going on just as much as it was when the blockade started in 2020.
And this is a question that might seem a little ridiculous on its face, but in a world where we have so many pressing concerns, we have Gaza, we have the opioid crisis, we have the housing crisis. What is so important about this cause? What is so important about protecting old growth forest? And I know part of the answer is because the environment is worth protecting. I guess what I'm looking for is the answer that inspires you all to keep going. Like when you wake up in the morning and you think about this kind of work, you have to remind yourself of the why. And what is the why for you?
I think I speak for a lot of people that showed up, and that is that I did feel called by the trees, like in a really direct way. And also for me as a woman, I'm 62, I'm a mother, I have a 17-year-old and a 22-year-old. I just felt like I had to do everything I could for the young people. And I think that what happened is in some ways parallel to kind of what's happening now with a lot of people with Gaza, in the sense that people did not understand the scale of destruction. And when people started to understand the scale of destruction, it was just like, I feel like there was a lot of people that just couldn't stand that. They would just not be okay with that. Now, how various people acted during that, I mean, it was messy. But I feel like that is part of what happened, is just the insanity of it, that you would do that. First of all, as you say, in like a kind of climate change, instrumentalist way, but also these are incredibly powerful, sacred beings.
Yeah, definitely agree with Tasha about I mean, if you had gone there, if you had walked in that ancient forest, like you could just feel the majesty of it and the magic of it. And yeah, some of the trees were like 1,000, 2,000 years old. So it's irreplaceable in that sense. And then, I mean, unless you want to wait another 2,000 years and leave it all alone until then. Um, there's also, I mean, right now our province is on fire. So there's that. I mean, this is directly contributing to that. All of the deforestation and destruction that has gone on over the years, just directly leads to that. And there's problems with air quality, and the trees oxygenate the environment for us. So if you like to breathe, then you should leave the trees alone.
Yeah, I think like Tasha mentioned, like there was a very like spiritual element of it for me, like of feeling really called by these trees. And I think also like what I came to with it, or what I came away from, and also like went in like with this knowledge, is like knowing how interlinked and the old growth is and the ancient forests are with like everything else. Like the ways that like those old growth forests are literally like the ancestors of the people who are from that land. The ways that the old growth forest allows, the salmon runs to exist. Not to mention like all the climate stuff. Something that keeps replaying in my mind over the past however many months it's been since October 7th, is like just at the same time, like parallel playing in my mind, like images of olive trees in Gaza being like cut down and burned, and images of old growth trees like shattering to the ground. Like in my heart understands these as like the same violence committed by the same perpetrator.
Sorry to interrupt, Karina, but could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's really interesting. When you say the same violence committed by the same perpetrator, because I think a lot of people listening might be understandably a little bit confused, say, wait a second, what are you talking about? One is old growth logging on Vancouver Island, and one is, dropping 2,000-pound bombs on children in Palestine. So I think that's a really interesting point, if you could elaborate on that.
I mean, there's like a lot to get into with it, but like at the base of it, it comes down to like the ways that colonization robs indigenous people of their ability to engage and be in relationship with the land. Right? Like logging old growth forests achieves that by like those forests are no longer there, those medicines, those animals, those like sacred places are no longer there. When olive groves are destroyed in Gaza, like those are sometimes like hundreds or 1,000-year-old like trees that families have been similarly stewarding those lands for generations. When we look at the like scale and numbers and like clear, obvious targeting of children in Gaza, I think of summer 2021 and how while we were at Fairy Creek, there were a whole bunch of children being quote unquote uncovered from the grounds of residential schools. I think about how, like, in so-called Canada, like, if you look at a map of, like, First Nations reserves and military bases, you're going to find a lot of them are really close together because actually, like, Canada is just what Israel wants to be in 100 years.
Yeah, this is, of course, very painful to talk about. And our work that we do on the show, we don't shy away from that pain. And we decided to do this second version of Humans of Fairy Creek, which is a completely newly devised version, because we wanted to continue, which we started in the first one, but really continue. Because right now, the escalation and acceleration of patriarchal, capitalist, colonial violence, I don't think the average person has any idea how seriously escalated and accelerated it is. And for me, I feel like we have to connect those dots. Like, it's so important. We did last year as well, but I feel like because there is this movement across, well, North America, but across really the globe, of student encampments for Palestine, like there is more and more these places of, one of the ways that are described as a place of encounter, but they're places to me of ethics, and they're places where people are starting to understand just the depth of the corruption that's at the foundation of everything that exists in this country/empire. And so Fairy Creek is like one example of that. And there, we all have come away from Fairy Creek in different ways. Like, especially a lot of white people my age still believe in, like, maybe the NDP is going to do something. Like, but I think for a lot of us, we realize like electoral politics is never going to fix this stuff. Like you said, who are the perpetrators? States and corporations are the perpetrators. And the states and the corporations are supported by the militaries and the police. And we saw, all of us experienced police violence, every single one of us here.
And the CRU, formerly known as KERG unit of the RCMP, worth mentioning that they like have direct connections to the IAOF in Israel and like go there and like train at Israeli facilities and then come here and
use those techniques.
Use violence against Indigenous land defenders.
So that's a great segue. If you could maybe back up, Tasha or Q or Karina, and tell us what is Humans of Fairy Creek and what that was last year and what it's going to be this year for people who have no idea and haven't heard of the production before.
So we are a pretty small group of people that have worked together for a while, and we're pretty tight. And we've all been involved in Fairy Creek in some way. And I would say like one of the reasons that we do all work together and work together well is because we do all come from this foundation of like understanding that deforestation is just one aspect of colonial violence. And also, I feel like even though, sorry, my brain is like, so are we all white?
Yes.
In our group, we're all okay. But no, that's not true. We got a person of Indigenous background.
Oh, yeah.
But we all
Subdivisors.
we're all coming from the place of understanding that this is also an Indigenous sovereignty issue in a country that is not, that in this country, when they say truth and reconciliation, what they mean is sweep under the rug or pacification, period.
So, yeah, if you could just give us more details about what the show is, what it consists of.
You want to? Sure. Yeah. So basically, Humans of Fairy Creek is a collectively created theater variety show where we sought to theatricalize the experiences of those of us who are like at and involved in Fairy Creek in a variety of different ways. Some ways were humorous, like fake news articles. Others were like sharing music from the blockades. I created a sound piece last year because I wasn't able to actually physically be there for any of the shows because I was working on 3 fringe shows last year. I created a sound piece that kind of like went sonically through like the experience of my arrest. What other kind of stuff did we have in there?
We had a skit about we had a skit built from people's experiences at the blockade where a person came in injured and was looked after by some medics, and in the process of the sketch they talk about what happened to them, and they were just a kid, like I think a teenager, when their injuries happened via the RCMP. Yeah, we had some dancing, and we had some pieces that were more informative. The moment of silence piece, we called it, which is when we made sure to honor the people that we talked about earlier, the people that had died because of the blockade, and one of our forest defender allies in Atlanta who was murdered, Tortuguita. So we'll probably do something similar this year, like some kind of piece around death and the colonial violence connected with Fairy Creek. Can we talk about what we're doing this year? Like, should we make it a surprise? I don't know.
Spoilers, there's a fashion show.
There is a fashion show of Fairy Creek fashions, because as you can imagine, there were a lot of cool fashions. And we have another piece where it's called Perhaps a Tale of 3 Kevins. And the Kevins are, do you know Kevin Niche by any chance, Joel? Okay.
I'm a recent Canadian immigrant from the U.S., so I know very little about Canadian politics and recent history.
Well, this is a local guy who's a total mensch. He's in his 60s. He's done all kinds of stuff, like be, what do you call it? The human shield for like, what do you call it? Like leftist radicals in Ecuador, et cetera, He's on a flotilla to Palestine right now. So he's one of our Kevins. He's a local hero. Then we have another Kevin who is kind of famous at the blockade for being drunk, belligerent, and
homophobic.
Liking chocolate milk. Yes, and also very homophobic. His name is also Kevin. And then the third Kevin is, of course, our least favorite Kevin here in Victoria, and that is Kevin Hall, the president of University of Victoria. So we've made a skit kind of like saying you got to be like Kevin Niche, not these other Kevins. Yep. What else are we doing? Remember?
There's music.
Yes, the music.
There's music, which maybe we'll sing a song for you in a bit. Maybe that would be nice to do. What else are we doing?
We're going to review the map.
We don't want to give too much away.
Yeah, we don't need to give it away. You got to
We've
come to
gotta
the
save
show.
some surprises.
We're doing the show at the Anarchist Book Fair in Victoria. So if you're going to be around for the Anarchist Book Fair, you can check us out.
And you're also doing the show at the Vancouver Fringe Fest, right?
Vancouver Fringe, we're doing 10 days of shows.
And that's from
6 days of shows, sorry.
September 5th to the 15th?
5th to the 15th. Oh,
Wonderful.
nice. We're only doing 6 shows in 10 days?
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
nice.
So if
We
people
have some
want,
days off.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'm looking forward to having some days off on the mainland.
Yeah.
so if people want to see the show in Vancouver, I assume they can go to the Vancouver Fringe Fest website?
Yeah.
And if people want to see the show at the Victoria Anarchist Book Fair, then they go to the Victoria Anarchist Book Fair. So
Yeah.
on the Saturday of the fair. I think the whole concept is just so fantastic. As a lifelong theater geek who started as a theater geek when he was 10, the answer I know in my soul. The answer is because you always do theater when you have the chance to do theater. But for the rest of the listeners who aren't theater geeks, taking all those experiences from Fairy Creek, all of that knowledge, wanting to continue that and do something with that, why did you choose theater? Of all the different ways of political and artistic expression, why live theater?
I just want to say that I feel like the reason I do it is because it was so important to me for these stories about all these brave young people to be told and to be out there in a way that maybe like people will actually listen, because the news stories of the time were total fucking bullshit. And like the level of bad news stories at the time was just shocking to me. So first of all, that's why we do it, because we have like a bit of an audience at these fringe festivals, and fringe festival audiences are pretty open-minded. Like they're people that will be open to learning something. But Karina can probably talk more about why they feel so strongly about theater. But I feel so strongly about these young people who did so much, risked so much, got hurt, and then like, what?
Yeah, I mean, my like background is in theater. It's what I have a degree in. So, seemed like the obvious choice for me, but also just like, I mean, generally why I think I am so strongly drawn to theater as a medium is just like I really don't think you can like reproduce the effect of like being in a room with people and like feeling together.
Mm.
And like I feel like so much of the positive media that like came out of Fairy Creek, or like media in general, like a lot of it was like very much like about the trees and the science and the like environmental side, which like good. And like that doesn't necessarily contribute to like a felt understanding and like a like soul understanding of like the importance of these places and the importance of defending them, that I think is something that can be moved through a body when you have these, and I would call the stage like a space of encounter as well, somewhat like an encampment. It's like a little bit more one-sided perhaps, but I mean there's also lots of ways that you can go around that or engage differently with audiences in theater. We did have a talk back section at the end of the show that allowed audiences to interact and ask questions as well, which is something I always really like to include in my theater practice. Another thing I think about theater is that like it's really inherently and inescapably in a lot of ways a collective practice. And like, yeah, it requires that, again, like people come together in a space to like work towards this one thing. And I think that even just for the people who worked on it and created it, like was hugely transformative for us and like really deepened our trust and connection and friendships with each other.
Yeah, I just want to add to what we've been saying about theater and about Fairy Creek and about these young people that I've been working with, is that the level of artistry of people that were at Fairy Creek, like I call it the depth of soul, the depth of artistry. The people in our show, the young people that I'm working with, Karina, Q, Marmar, the others, forget if they want their names on or not. I forget. Like it wouldn't be the same show without how beautiful and expressive and artistic. I hate using the word talent, but talented all these people are. So, and there were so many at Fairy Creek. Like one of our key songs last year was a song that Marmar performed, but was written by a young woman who created it at Fairy Creek. Like such a powerful song. I mean, there's so many of them. So yeah, something about art and souls, very important.
So I'll try not to get bogged down in the politics of theater, because we could have a whole, like, you're speaking my language.
We've got to move on from that.
Speaking my language. I do, though. So I didn't go to Victoria Fringe Fest last year. I did go 2 years ago, and it was great. And I love artists and I love actors, and nothing but love and respect. One thing I did notice, not just about that festival, but a lot of the theater that I've seen, I don't know, since I was 19, is how pretty apolitical it is. And I find that, as a political theater geek, kind of disappointing. And I'm just wondering, before we move on, as we should, if you have any thoughts or opinions about why there seems to be such a dearth. I can only speak for the US and Canada. I can't speak for other cultures. But why there seems to be, or maybe I'm wrong, a dearth of good political theater.
Reflection? Is it like a reflection of our society and how apolitical, in general, a lot of people are? They just don't want to go there, maybe? Yeah.
Wow, I could talk about this for a long time. Yeah, like apolitical society, I think there's several pieces here. Like one of the pieces is just like capitalism, and like if people are trying to make a living off doing art, like if you're making really radical political work, like grants are gonna have fun with that. And like also like the people that are gonna see that are not the rich people who live in Oak Bay who can pay $40 to go see a show. And also like I've run into this sentiment of, oh well, like this show it's meant to be an escape for people. And it's like, honestly, guys, we don't need more fucking escapes like in the Imperial Core. Like we need to escape this mindset that tells us that we need to escape, and we need to actually start destroying it so that we don't have anything that we need to escape from. We don't need to keep buying bath bombs, metaphorically, whatever, the equivalent is, and like going to see nice fluffy shows. Like, I'm sorry, like we're out of fucking time.
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Fascism is here.
Gosh, I mean, it was such a great answer. Before, I'd like to turn it over to Q for a nice musical, not break, a nice musical political teaser before we wrap up. But before we do you just have any final thoughts for our listeners regarding why not just Fairy Creek is so important, and not just why political art is so important, but why this particular approach that you all are engaging in, a variety show about one of the most, important political movements of our time, why that has a place in, like Karina, like you said, in, late stage, insipid, pre-revolutionary capitalist fascism. I know it's a big question. Anybody want to tackle it first?
I can dig into this. Okay, like the first thing that comes to mind is like, I think first and foremost is actually the like healing capacity of creating work together for those of us that experienced trauma as a fallout from Fairy Creek. Second of all, like, I think the variety show format specifically allows for like a lot of different perspectives to be shown in and shared in the show, and also like allows for like it to not get too bogged down in like all the awful shit that happened. Like there are like real moments of like humor and levity and irreverence that I think are both like important when creating work for an audience, because like I get it. Nobody wants to engage in a work that's like that feels like pulling teeth and like makes you just like really sad at the end. Although I do, as an artist, as with my sound piece, like aspire to make work that makes people like really sad and uncomfortable. But I also want to make them laugh. Like I want to make them laugh and cry during a show. Like I think that's
All the emotions.
all the emotions. Oh, I kind of lost my track. Yeah, humor is important with this, and the variety show like format specifically, I think really helps present opportunities for that and like create some balance and like engagement. We entertain to instruct, as they said about the medieval mystery plays.
What, and maybe that's an answer to my last question before we turn it over to Q. What, in your perfect world, the lights come on after people have seen Humans of Fairy Creek. How do you want them to feel? What do you want them to walk away with?
Full breath. They just go out into the street and start rioting.
Barricades?
Yeah, like rip their clothes off, run down the street, start breaking windows, call their friends to come rip their clothes off, run down the street, start breaking windows. Like that's what I would hope. But yeah, I think back to what you were asking, I think that one thing theater can do too is like this idea of teach a diversity of tactics. Like it's kind of gives an example.
Yeah, I think in reality, like short of like exiting the theater and starting the revolution,
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, don't do anything illegal, but you know, I think like what I really want people to come out is that like that soul felt like understanding and like having something like shift in their heart that's gonna like make them understand their role in dismantling the systems and empires that like allow old growth logging and other awful world destroying things to happen, and that's gonna like sustain them in that practice and that fight.
Fantastic. The show is Humans of Fairy Creek. It is at the Victoria Anarchist Book Fair, and it is at the Vancouver Fringe Fest from September 5th through the 15th. And I'm very proud to mention again that Humans of Fairy Creek is a recipient of one of Camas Books' mutual aid microgrants. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for coming up with such an incredible and moving piece of art and politics. So please go see the show. And with that, we'll turn it over to Q for a musical interlude.
So this is a little sing-along written by Jordan Smart, an American singer-songwriter. I have omitted one verse that's really U.S. specific. It talks about voting for Democrats or Republicans and voting, shouting 4 more years, or wearing a MAGA hat, which, I mean, things have even changed since he released this song. Now we have a new candidate. So anyways, new cop for president. Yay. This is a great song written by him, and it's called Who Would Jesus Bomb? If Jesus Christ came back today, like you threatened he will, which poor group of people do you think that he would kill? Who would Jesus choose to starve if you gave him the chance? And if there was a genocide, would he take a neutral stance? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would he say it's complicated and there's sinners on both sides? Or would he say that some people, they just deserve to die? If Jesus Christ rose from the dead and on a sidewalk slept, would you extend your hand to him or just watch where you stepped? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus hate the gay folk, the queer folk, or the trans? Would he suggest they end their lives according to God's plans? Would Jesus tell a homeless man to get a fucking job, or turn his back on the poor? Would Jesus be a snob? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus build a border wall? Would Jesus drive a tank? Would Jesus be a landlord? Would Jesus run a bank? Would Jesus Christ feel safe in his skin if he came to your town? And would you still believe in him if you found out he was brown? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine,